We are live.
We're live. We are here. Hello, Jennifer. Hi, Lynn.
I'm going to see if I can get connected up here. It always takes just a minute.
Okay. Hi, Sharon.
Here we go. Okay. Oh, you're going to have to be back 1 second. Okay, hang on. I'm just about.
I had to mute my computer.
I was afraid we could get that wow, 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 wow.
It was me. If you're new to Threshold, we have a little PTSD over sound problems, but okay. So, oh dear.
Okay, should we get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. This is the Threshold podcast where we talk about the in-between spaces and living in the in-between spaces with intention and awareness. And my name is Julia Ryman. I have a blog. I want to use the old-fashioned word blog rather than calling it a Substack, right? I write about embodied living. That's the name of my blog. And I write about the intersection between your physical body and your intangible experience and how you can live in that in-between place with both physical reality and intangible.
Mm-hmm.
And Emily?
And I'm Emily Conway, and I write the Substack or the blog, if you want to call it that, in space, which is personal essays about living with intention and awareness. I also have some poetry there and some gardening and making and mending if you're into those things. And Julia and I just really enjoy this podcast every week, talking about all things liminal. Anyway, Julia, tell us what we're going to talk about today.
So today we're talking about sacred spaces, and this is our third in our series. Next week is ritual, and last week was, help me out here.
I don't know. Last week we were off. We skipped a week, and so we're sort of out of, but I'll tell you here in about 30 seconds once I get my notes for it.
So in
how to be with the natural world. That was a really good conversation.
Yes, so that was a really good conversation. Now sacred spaces, and next week ritual. Yep. And before I begin, first of all, I want to encourage everyone to make comments. We love the comments. We love hearing people's perspectives and what this brings up for you. And in particular today, this is a good day for that because I am going to start a little differently than we do. I'm going to start with a story. And so I want to encourage you to get tea. If you have a chance to just sit and listen, or if you're doing something, to sort of sit and listen in that kind of wintry mode where we like to hear stories. And so I would love to hear what my stories remind you of in your own life and use the comments to please let us know.
Yeah.
So anything else before we begin?
No, tell us the story.
Okay, so this is a story in 3 parts. It's really like 3 vignettes. Part 1 is called The Heart. So when I was young, I lived in Oakland, California, and we lived in a really, really bad neighborhood. There were police helicopters that flew overhead and drug houses down the road, and we were right near the county hospital that gave mental health services to the homeless population. And so we often have people having episodes walking up and down our street. Our van was vandalized and we had things stolen multiple times. And we had one baby and soon there would be a second one. And we decided we needed a new home. And through magical circumstances of word of mouth, we heard about a home on Madrone Street. Madrone Street in Oakland, it was a step up from our neighborhood, but still considered bad, but not very, very bad. So we were quite pleased with our, ascending home situation. And when we went to go look at this home, it was everything you can imagine. If I said to you, it was a little old lady home. It had little old lady smell and little old lady furniture. And when you walked into the kitchen, it had this range, a Tappan Fabulous 400 range. And if you've never seen one of those, it has this long, skinny piece of wood that's like a cutting board about waist high. And then you reach under it and you pull out a shelf that has 4 electric burners in a row. And then above this is an oven where you can cook your turkey or your chicken, right? And it was very, very modern. The bathroom had black and white checkerboard tile and a pink toilet. And on the sink cabinet, she had a full vanity set, including a hand mirror and a glass bowl with a lid so you could keep your cotton balls protected. She was this little bird of a woman, tiny, tiny woman who dragged her oxygen tank behind her, holding a cigarette with the other hand. You kids, just show yourself around. If you have any questions, you can ask me. And so I loved her immediately. And we ended up buying this house. This house is a style that's very common in the Bay Area. It's long and skinny with houses on either side and windows only in the front and the back on the short side. And you'd go up the stairs in the front to come into the house. And on the corner, from floor to ceiling, was a glass window. So it was almost like being in half of a glass box. And in that corner, we put the ugliest chair you can imagine. It was kind of green gold. It had buttons on the back from the upholstery. But the cool thing about the chair was that it both swiveled and rocked. So most of the time, we turned that chair towards the living room so we could talk with our guests. But there were many times I turned that chair to face those glass windows. And I sat in that chair with my babies and I rocked them and sang to them and told them stories and cuddled them and soothed them and helped them sleep. And I would bob back and forth in my ugly chair, overlooking a very urban Oakland landscape. And in my memory, I don't actually have a memory of anything beautiful that I saw outside that window. My memory is all shades of gray. I don't remember graffiti or boarded up windows, but they certainly was a neighborhood of people just trying to get by. And so that chair rocking, looking out the window at urban Oakland became the heart of my house. Mm-hmm. And I missed that chair for years after we got rid of it. And every now and again, I can see someone throwing out a chair that's sort of the similar style. And it makes me remember my years of sitting in that chair looking out of that window. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Part 2 is called Fairy Dust. Came to my house and walked in the living room. In the northeast corner, I have a stainless steel bookshelf, and I put a gold cloth over that. And on top of that, I made a shrine or altar. And I followed sort of a formal, traditional setup. I have cornmeal and water, and I have rattles, and they're arranged in a very particular way according to the instructions of a lineage. I face that shrine when I'm going to be doing my sacred dances. And when I'm finished, I give thanks in that direction and offer prayers of gratitude and prayers for the people I care about. But it is a rather formal structure following kind of instructions. if you went around my house, scattered around my house, you'd find various baskets and bowls full of crystals and rocks and various objects, pieces of glass and bits of jewelry. But you wouldn't really think of me as like a crystal woman. Like you wouldn't walk in my house and have that impression. I don't have like crystals hanging from the windows, throwing rainbows, and I don't have a big salt candle and big chunks of amethyst, you know. It's more like it's tucked away. In my bathroom on a shelf, I have a vase, a basket made from a deer antler. So my sister gifted me a class with Richard Gonzalez, who is an artist in Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. And he weaves baskets from deer antlers with a traditional native technique. And he offers classes. So my sister and I went to this class, and he had this big box of deer antlers, and he had drilled holes in the antlers, and then you weave reed around through the holes, and you end up weaving a basket in the shape of the deer antler. And so while he told us what to do, and while my sister and I are weaving these baskets, for 2 or 3 hours, he told us stories about his life when he was a kid and life on the reservation and the tradition of these baskets and various escapades he had. And he told stories for 2 or 3 hours as we wove this. And then that basket is now sitting on my shelf with crystals on it. Mm-hmm. In my backyard, there is a structure made from curly willow branches cut from the tree that I had cut down on my front yard. And my neighbors gathered those branches and made this kind of hourglass shape. And they nailed it somehow. I don't even know how they managed that, and kind of used twine. And then I think it was supposed to be a base of a table, except curly willow branches are curly and it does not support a table. So they gave it back to me because these branches had come from my tree, and I put it back in my garden. And I put a plastic bowl, the kind you would use underneath a planter to catch the water, the runoff from watering the plants. And I put that on the top and put, again, shells and colored glass beads so that the birds would be able to take a bath in the water, but it wouldn't be too deep. I was worried it would be too deep for the birds. And over time, leaves fall in there and it gets kind of grungy, and then it dries out and I forget to put water. And so it's not a particularly beautiful bird bath. It sits at an angle so that there's water only at one corner. But it became a special part of my garden. And I began to put objects under there that were too special to throw in the garbage or give away, but needed to be returned to the earth. They needed to move on. And I think it started with a pair of shoes that I got from Rajasthan, India. And shoes from Rajasthan are a very particular shape. They come to a point at the toe and they have a little curl of leather at the tip. And these shoes were made by a traditional shoemaker in Rajasthan, where he would hold the leather with his feet while he sewed it with his hands. The shoe was covered in fuchsia pink fabric that had embroidery with gold and silver thread. And he had made this to fit my foot in particular. It was a beautiful object, but at some point it needed to move on from my home. So I put it underneath my bird bath so it could rot and go back to the earth. And that became a spot for all sorts of things that need to return to the earth. I have leather pouches and I have photos of gurus and I have various special things as an offering underneath my wobbly bird bath. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Part 3 is called art. So if you all read the comments from this Threshold podcast, you might notice that we often get comments from my friend Kelly Petrie. Kelly is a local person here at Madison. I know her. And for the past year, she's been teaching a class about the 5 wisdom energies or the 5 Buddha energies. And so once a month, we meet in her studio and we learn about these different energies. And these energies, it's kind of a mandala practice. The different energies have a wisdom associated with them. And then also a klesha, a not wisdom, right? Like pride or jealousy or some aspect of a human condition that is not so helpful to us. They also have directions and colors and various aspects to them to help you kind of understand how the world works. These types of typography help make sense of the word world. So each time we show up, Kelly decorates her studio in the energy that we will be talking about for that session. And our most recent one was Ratna. Ratna is the energy of the south, and it's earth is the element, and the color is gold, and it's about richness and abundance. And I kind of think of it as like the graciousness of someone hosting a feast. Mm-hmm. When we walked in her studio, she had gold colored scarves and fabric on all the windows. And there was a table with plates that had seeds and nuts that were overflowing on them. Every surface, the shelves and the tables had plants and jewelry and trinkets. There were vases. One vase was tipped over with gold-colored foil candies spilling out of it. And she had an orange Buddha on one shelf. And there were lights. And it was so creative, so full of art, and so full of the essence of that energy that it was like breathing it in and soaking it in, color and texture of Ratna energy. Mm-hmm. When I say that, because Ratna is about abundance, it might not surprise you. But what's interesting is that when we learned about Vajra, which is the energy of clear insight, the element is water and the color is blue. And there's kind of a sharp quality to it. Sort of like when the person says the thing that needs to be said, but no one really wants to hear it. It has a kind of, sharpness to clear insight. And I wouldn't imagine that same feeling of abundance with that energy of Vajra. And yet, when we walked in her studio, it was like swimming in Vajra energy. Oh. Water and blue. And she did a meditation with water in it. And so you have this essence of clarity by simply being in her studio. Mm. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. So in those 3 vignettes, we've had examples of sacred spaces that were formal and casual, temporary and permanent, sort of singular objects or full environments, right? Natural spaces and man-made spaces, beauty and not beauty, frankly, ugliness at times, right? And some of them evolved from my life spontaneously, and some of them were put there with intention. And yet all of those had spaces that came to have a certain energy, a certain potency. Mm-hmm. We all feel, and I think we all know. Mm-hmm. So for today's discussion, we're talking about sacred places. I want to open it up to people to think about how sacred spaces show up in your life and to really open up to all of the ways it shows up in our life, even in unexpected ways. Mm-hmm. And take a moment in kind of our wintry atmosphere to tune into the ways the sacred spaces in our lives have held us and helped us heal and helped us grow. And to just think about how the many ways they have influenced our life.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you, Julia.
Yeah.
Thank you for those stories because they're so evocative. And I would encourage people, if you have a sacred space that you want to include in the comments or anything that you want to share about Julia's stories, please do. Um, I I'm really glad you told those stories because as I was thinking about this topic, I thought about how I don't tend to look for sacred spaces. Um, and I'm one of those people who, if you asked me to look, where are they? I would have to think a little bit. But so I guess I don't have the habitual intention of creating them, or maybe even, I think I notice them. But as far as creating them, I don't have that intention. But as I thought more about this, I end up creating them anyway. I forget to label them that, or I don't, what I end up, what I do is I think about what I need. Like, I need warmth. I need safety in some respect. I need quiet. I need beauty. And then I go about creating a space that helps give me that, like my garden or my house. And and then and then I live in it, you know? Um, and of course, that is, to me anyway, a sacred space. So I'm sort of going at it either backwards, or I mean, and backwards isn't bad. I don't mean that but I'm backing my way into it. I don't know what I'm doing, but um, but your stories help me to think about, okay, where are these other spaces that I just don't recognize as sacred spaces, in my life? Because I think I'm just pretty much creating them all the time because I need them. I just am not noticing that they happen to be these sacred containers, which brings me to another question of what is sacred, and that could be a whole other that could be a whole other podcast. But yeah. We do have a comment from Lynn though. Do you want to read it, Julia?
Yes.
Or
Well, thank you. I live in the mountains where my walks are a sacred experience.
Yep.
Well, we could talk about the meaning of sacred because there's lots of layers to that word. I think for our purposes today, I'm using it really broadly and gently to
Mhm.
mean special, but a little more than special. There's kind of an energetic potency to these things, right?
Mhm.
And I have to admit, like I said, I'm not a crystal woman. Like, I'm not intentionally creating these spaces
Mhm.
the way some people do, right?
Mhm.
I would be low on that scale.
Yeah.
But certainly I feel them. And when I pause and when I'm spacious, I
Mhm.
realize they're part of my life. I think I get wrapped in the busyness of life, and it's just, you just go through your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was lucky. Early on, my early life, I traveled to India where there were places that people had prayed for thousands of years. And I worked in Israel in actually an archaeological dig that was a sacred place. And I visited various churches and various places considered sacred from a religious sense, right?
Mhm.
Got that power so that even though I may or may not, depending where I was, shared the religious beliefs,
Mhm.
you could feel centuries of prayer.
Mhm.
Like something, I don't know what it is, that is there when all these people for years and years and years pray in one place.
Mhm.
I also was at a place in Vermont where there are these ideas of ley lines on the earth, which are sort of like acupuncture meridians, but on the earth. And so where ley lines come together, there's like sacred spots. And it's often used to understand why certain places are considered sacred to various cultures and, why another place may not be, right? And so I was at a place that was considered very sacred, and you could feel the energy of that.
Mhm.
So what is sacred is a really good question, right? Is a basket that has fond memories, is that sacred? I don't know, right? We could probably talk about that. But there's something about objects and having object and spaces, right? And sometimes the space is created by the object, sometimes the space holds the objects, that has that energy that you can feel and that kind of grounds you. It thanks for ourselves.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I like the word you used, like an energy that has a certain potency, and then something that helps us return to ourselves, something that grounds, um, that settles, that holds. Yeah, and not every space is that way. I mean, I would not call the inside of my car a sacred space, mostly because my car is, uh is sort of a disaster on the inside. However, maybe someone who spends a whole lot of time in their car and has done a lot of, I don't know what, maybe somebody else's car is. But I can definitely tell the difference. There's a different feel between, yeah, between the spaces that hold you and that bring you back to yourself and the spaces that don't. And again,
Because if someone was born in your car or someone died in your car, how that energy would change. And I mean, those I offer those as because they're the extreme bookends, right, of human experience.
right.
Right? And there's a million experiences in between that on that.
Yeah. No, absolutely though. And those are
Like, I don't know if that changes it because, again, are we imbuing these objects with
mhm,
this energy, or do the objects possess energy on their own? I
mhm.
don't know. Maybe that's a little academic, but you know,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always tend to take both sides, which is complicated and sometimes impossible. But you, I mean, the object or whatever it is, the space has energy, you have energy. And those kind of come together and they create something. Um and I think that's why this idea of sacred spaces, and then we're going to talk about ritual next week, um, are so personal in some ways. So because it's you're coming to it, and the space is coming to you, or the object is coming to you, and something is created, and um, and that's unique.
yeah.
Love this idea of holding and of coming back to yourself. I think I mean, from this conversation, I'm gonna take that away, um, and look for places that do that for me. Just pay a little bit.
Question. If you
No,
could name right now, you said that in reflecting, you were thinking about sacred places that you sort of backed into. So can you give an example of that?
well, I mean, I gave examples of my garden. This particular house that I live in, I just feel like is incredibly. I just had a connection with this house for I mean, for before I lived in it. We owned it and it was an Airbnb. And then when we moved in, I just felt like the house just holds things really well. It cares for what's in it. And then, of course, I love the hiking trails near me in Nebraska. I'm in eastern Nebraska, and they're on the edge between the plains and the Midwest. And that edge spaces are very sacred to me. So those are some examples. Yeah, we're getting close to time here.
Yeah. We know, so those of you who haven't been with us before, we typically try and end in just 30 minutes so that this is a little bite-sized podcast. I knew today might go over because typically we don't start off with such a long story or long introduction. So today's a little bit different, kind of in honor of the holidays.
Yes.
But before we move on, I do want to invite people to make comments if they have any thoughts that have come up for them before we move on, and then we can do our closing.
Yeah. Any thoughts about sacred? What is sacred to you? What does it mean to you? Sacred spaces. We had Lynn share about the mountains. And last week we talked about the natural world. And so it's interesting then to have that come up again here in Lynn's comment about those being sacred spaces as well. And we don't really create those spaces. I go out on the trails here. I mean, the trail is created, but the landscape around it is naturally created. That's a whole other and yet it holds me and grounds me. So anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for being here.
Yes, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for listening and being with us today. And next week we are going to talk about ritual. And what is ritual? We talked about what sacred spaces are. What is ritual? And what role do rituals play in our lives? How to locate them in our lives? How to be with them? I picked this topic, and I think it's kind of funny that I picked it because I am not a ritual type person. I tend to kind of run from ritual. So, and yet I find that ritual finds me. And much like sacred space, I find myself engaging in ritual, sort of accidentally and by surprise. So we're going to talk a bit about ritual next week, and I hope that you join us for that. Thank you for being with us, all of you, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.